So welcome back, everybody, to Santa Fe Fashion Week, Fashion Behind the Curtain, where we talk about all things fashion and business fashion related. I'm so excited to have Jinny on the line. She's a fashion designer, actually based here in New Mexico. Jinny, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, I am a independent fashion designer. I'm also a health coach. I'm also a private flight attendant on the side of that. But I grew up in New Mexico my whole life. I went to Oñate High School, Camino Real, and Desert Hills. And I left at 18 years old to go to the Art Institute of Dallas. I got my fashion design BA degree out there. I became an independent designer for costumes, dogs, bridal wear, and drag queens in Dallas for about 10 years. I ended up getting sick and surrendering things and moving back to Cruces 6 years ago. And in my process of health coaching others, I learned that I didn't want to die on that fashion hill and that there was more for me. So I got back into the industry and turned my studio from domestic machines to industrial machines and started a micro factory here in Cruces. After COVID, I started to learn that I wanted to get into the activewear of menswear, but more on a tailored aspect of a suit, a button up, and pants that were made out of activewear to be more comfortable for travel. And I plan on showcasing that menswear ready to wear look in Santa Fe at the end of the year for Fashion Week.
That sounds amazing. So that sounds a bit like a very interesting journey. So now that you're kind of pivoting from what you were doing to the men's activewear, do you see yourself manufacturing anything yourself? You said working with industrial machines could be a little difficult, or what's your manufacturing process going to look like?
It was very difficult. When I got all the machines, I bought them from an alteration lady who was going out of business here in town. So I had about five different machines from different countries, different brands. And although I'm very familiar with sewing and industrial machines, it was a really big learning curve for me. It was almost impossible for me. I didn't have my closest mechanic was in El Paso, and then after COVID, he passed away. And then the closest mechanic after that were two in Albuquerque. So I was kind of this 100-pound girl, 4'11", that was really against the raging beast of these machines.
Mhm.
I don't think people realize that making clothing is it's a very taxing thing on the machines, on the people. It's very difficult to find sourcing and parts and materials here in America.
Mhm. Interesting. So with that said, so do you see yourself, um, as you scale up this new collection, you're gonna use, manufacturing outside of your home?
I'm not. I'm gonna try to figure out how to outsource. I have two sewers that I have faith in.
Mhm.
I'm gonna try to get it to where I don't touch a machine this time and to where I can do the business side and the logistics sides outside of that. And I want to use this opportunity to see how it looks like for me to delegate that type of logistic to two sewers and how me, another sewer, and a sample sewer will look in one room. And hopefully with this, I can make that work. That's the
Fantastic.
goal.
So since we like to talk about the business of fashion, how do you see yourself once you, get your collection established as far as rolling that out to are you gonna work with boutiques? You're gonna excuse me, try to sell directly to the consumers?
Yes, I want a small pop up, not necessarily independent as my pop up, but kind of like pop up into other stores. Santa Fe is definitely on my radar. Aspen and Vel and Scottsdale are all the places I'm looking at. I deal with a lot of neoprene and outerwear, so my fabrics are very ski driven, very mountain driven.
Mm.
So I have to be careful where I place that. But Santa Fe's been my number one place that I want to keep at least my flagship at, and I want to pop up first. And if things are right and I can get the manufacturing done properly, because I want to be able to manufacture them, I don't want to outsource it, I want to keep it in New Mexico. I'll eventually start my own boutique out there.
So, I actually did a podcast the other day with a designer out of New York. She's actually Filipino, but she's been in New York for some time now, and she does a lot of consignment, not only in the States, but overseas. And so when you say pop-ups, do you see maybe consignment stores as maybe a way to go?
I do. I really do. I think that's the route for me. I don't think I'll ever make a batch more than 12 pieces in one. And I
Mhm.
think with that said, it's they're key pieces that you'd have for a long time. So I just see me being on somebody else's flagship as a consignment for sure.
Have you ever been to Magic in Vegas? It's that big trade show, and
I haven't, but I've been wanting to.
yeah, it's pretty awesome. So I go, as media and as a buyer, And I always find it's interesting because some designers feel like it's the job of the boutique, be it a consignment store or a regular boutique, to drive the traffic, to sell those items. And then some people feel like it's the designer's job to do kind of like the heavy lifting, let's say on social media, say, hey, by the way, we're available at such and such stores. How do you see yourself kind of working with these different stores?
I think it works both ways. I think a brand should be branded enough and have its identity so clear that they already have somewhat of a following. I think that the brand should pop up themselves, have their hangers, have their setup to where you don't put the consignment store into that pressure. It's really hard for someone to sell your identity when you don't have your full store. It's also very important that you place your brand in the right store. If you're just not in any store, that you guys both share the same identity of selling and branding. And if I'm an outerwear, menswear, that I'm in a higher luxury, tailored shop type of thing. I think it's important that there's a yin to a yang, but I think it's mainly the designer's job to push through the sales and the marketing and how all that works. You don't ever want somebody to have control over your identity like that.
I just bought my first pair of boots. I just started doing like country dancing and
Nice.
taking classes. So I went to, I think it was Boot Barn, and I bought their brand. But it's interesting. So the sales clerk, I mean, she was super nice and she was a little bit helpful. And I did explain to her that I haven't bought boots since I was 15. I'm like 61 years old now. And so she was kind of helpful, but then I'm kind of a whiner and the boots didn't fit well and or didn't feel like they fit well. And I'm kind of more of a sneaker guy anyway. So I went back another time and the next couple of people I spoke to definitely knew more about boots and how to deal with new boot buyers. I even over talking to another customer. But you're right, it's so hard where you're depending on the sales clerk at another store, be it the owner or a sales clerk, to
Right.
get your story across to the consumer.
Yeah, it can be kind of scary. It really
Yeah.
can. And to work so hard on something and then to give it to somebody else to potentially either make it rise or to potentially make it fall, that's why it's super important to make sure that you find your tribe in that world.
Mhm.
That you guys sync together, the owners, you sit down and you have a real relationship with them. It's not just a strictly business relationship, but you guys see eye to eye on, this is my hard work and this is your hard work, and let's make this work together.
Well, it's cool. Just for this podcast, I'm actually doing two today. But I spoke to a gentleman. His name's Lucas. He's about to graduate college, and I came across this video on TikTok where he talks about how social media is the new runway, and really it kind of
Mm.
boils down to eyeballs, the power of social media and storytelling, how important that is. And even with like say Santa Fe Fashion Week, I think the people that do Fashion Week successfully, not just on the producer side, but the designers that participate is the storytelling. So some of them will share on social media, almost like a documentary of their getting ready for the fashion event, and then they might do some photo shoots on the way to the event, and then of course at the event and afterwards. So I mean, they're really leveraging the power of being at an event, not just being at the event, but building social media before and afterwards.
Right, that storytelling is super important. I think all of us that do anything great in life, there's a story behind it. There's a happy story. There's always a sad story. There's always that moment where we break down and we don't think that we're enough or that things just aren't working. Being a maker in America is very difficult. I'm grateful for magic because of sourcing and stuff like that. But if you think about it, if we didn't have magic, there would be no sourcing in America. It would be very difficult to find products that were good. So there's always this hard story of making in America, and the fact that social media gives us the opportunity to story tell how long it took us to get here and what this was. I've never made a collection that didn't have a story, and I've never made a collection honestly that didn't come from some type of pain or hardship or some huge overcome. And every time it walks and it's done, it feels so great because there was a moment in that time where you didn't think you would make it. And I think it's important that people outside of just the natural clothing world, they understand how hard it is to do these things. And just to make basic clothing is very difficult. So to make the art and to do the tailored work and the gowns and all the bead work, and how New Mexico's got some really great artists in this whole state. It's nice to see how people, becoming such a it is the whole entire story.
No, they really, I mean, you cover really great stuff. Um, Going forward, like Santa Fe Fashion Week's always been kind of like that typical runway show. and now it's evolving to this, it's still Santa Fe fashion, but it's fashion behind the curtain, and I want to roll it out to different cities. But what I want to do is kind of bring the back of the house to the front of the house. I always think like the cool kids are kind of behind the curtain, there's photography going on, there's the rush of the show, and then everybody's kind of sitting on the other side of the curtain just waiting for this show to happen. And with my show, I want like to see like, maybe the hair and makeup getting done and the photographers creating the lookbooks and the models already stylized. But you're right. I mean, it's like when you even go to a restaurant and the food served, like the heartache of like the owner signing a lease and then finding the vendors and then hiring the cooks and the people don't show up. I mean, there's so much that goes into that meal and then into fashion, like you said. It's like there's so many things that touch that product by the time it gets to the
For sure, that's
boutique
a
and the
great
department store. It's pretty
analogy.
incredible.
It is incredible, and that's a great analogy. I mean, even down to the basics of the meal that you get at that lunch when you go to that restaurant, there's so many things that go into detail of that one moment that you're having for just 5 minutes. Especially for a runway show, when somebody has 3.5 minutes to showcase what they've done in a whole year,
Yeah.
is it's nice to hear the story behind it. It really is.
No, I agree. And it's interesting to pivot from like a runway show because I've walked the runway just for fun, with some of my designers, and I get the adrenaline of being on the runway. I get like the designers loving the applause and that moment, and the models, they love that feeling of walking on the runway. And now my show will be more like it's immersive because I think a lot of people want this immersive event, so they won't be on the runway. They'll be in this space where people can actually walk up and take photos and then walk over. My shows are more like show and sell rather than show and tell, where you can actually buy
Mm.
items directly from designers. But again, I think it's that story, and I think it's hard too for some designers or people in general is they don't like to get in front of the camera. I shoot a little video just for this, and I'm trying to be an actor, and it still took me 10 takes, even though I know what I want to
Mm.
talk about, and I tend to mumble a lot. But yeah, the storytelling and I think if you want to be a designer, you have to kind of be in the limelight and be able to tell your story.
You do, you really do. And I think every designer has this amazing becoming story of heartache that becomes this, fairy tale in
Mm,
the end. And I don't know a designer that hasn't had this amazing rock bottom breaking moment that rebirthed their brand.
mm,
I don't know one that hasn't. I know my story is pretty powerful in the mental health world that, this has consumed me my whole entire life. I've been sewing since I was 12. I always knew I wanted to do this from day one.
mm,
And it consumed me so bad that, I mean, it's made me feel so lost and so isolated and by myself because making in America isn't a thing. And so at one point, about, a year ago, I wanted to surrender all of it. Like, I didn't even want to be here anymore. I was so exhausted and beaten into the ground that I had lost the love for the only love I've ever known my whole life. And so when I finally redirected my mental health, I decided that I needed to, I went into Mesilla Valley. I got really safe. I got really grounded. I had to rewrite what sewing was for me and how I was going to allow myself to be burned out because it's really difficult to find sewers. And I had a really horrible relationship with time because I don't have children and I'm not married. So I would just, every night, I would just grind myself into the ground. I would sleep 3 hours a night. And then it really took a toll on my mental health. It took my serotonin out, it took my happiness out, it drained me, and this is the second time it's happened. So when I went into Mesilla Valley, I redirected my mental health, realized that I wanted to rewrite the story again, and that I was going to do it in the name of community, and that I it takes a village to do this. It takes a whole village, and that I was going to start it from me not sewing anymore, and I was going to learn to delegate my sewers and my pattern makers, and I would start teaching people this trait of this art that is dying. Last week I got a notice from, I went to the Art Institute of Dallas, and the Art Institute worldwide is canceled. They have completely permanently closed them. And that was extremely detrimental to my health because it kind of told me that I didn't matter and that
mm.
art's dead, it's canceled. That really bothered me that, trade schools like that don't matter in the art world and that AI has completely taken over. And I think that with pairing up with AI, and the artists and keeping the artists in the workshops, I think we can make some really good things if we can find an even balance of both of them. And that's really where my story is coming from is I'm not a canceled artist. I'm going to continue to preach that the Art Institute was the best thing that ever happened to me. Um, Balancing your mental health is very, very important. And that if we unite as a village, we can make this work. And I think New Mexico is the perfect place for this.
So there's a lot of great artisans, a lot of great creativity. It's interesting too because there's always been tariffs, and I get like wanting to bring back American jobs and all that. I mean, all that makes sense. But going back to the fashion industry, I mean, a lot of the craftsmanship and stuff like that, we're just not. You can't just turn on a switch and make a bunch of
No, you
people trained
can't.
to do the work. It takes a lot of hours, and people actually want to do the work and the training and stuff like that. And maybe there's a bunch of people who would like to get into that line of work, but but you can't just pivot like that and say, "Oh my God, we're going to start manufacturing here in the United States, and it's
No.
going to be fine."
Absolutely not. As long as we can keep the small batch manufacturing, we have a beautiful, beautiful culture of the indigenous makers here in this town. And to me, that's where the heart beats at. I don't think that they get enough credit for who and what they are. We've got some of the best beaters in the world just at our fingertips, just literally, all over this state. And I think that, I mean, that's where the heart starts.
Hmm.
It's here, and people want to make, and it is a time consuming task, and it's a skill set that you show up for every day, and it's probably something that needs to be implemented into the youth community at this point and let that grow over the next 20 years. That's kind of more where my mind's at, because that's where I started, was at 12 years old.
Hmm.
um, I think that local designers can somehow make micro factories a thing.
That makes
They
makes
don't
a lot of
have to
sense.
have this large scale of things. You only have to sell a few things of these things, and continue to grow from there, and hopefully something can happen from that.
Yeah, I was talking to a designer in Colombia. She's a very interesting woman, and I think she at one time she was a pretty big deal, and then she's scaling back, going back to like what you're talking about with mental health and again, realizing like what's important. Not to say like, hey, if you want to be a huge designer, huge success, hey, that's cool too, but it does come at a cost, right?
It
With your
does.
mental health, and it's a lot, and it's interesting too. So a friend of mine for people that follow me, a friend of mine, Dr. Andy Hammond, he's got this energy drink. I do his marketing. It's called Beyond Energy, and in a way, it's just because he's got like 3 SKUs, and so if you get people hooked on an energy drink, they just keep buying the same one, and eventually you could have more flavors and whatnot. But with fashion, it's like every season you got to come up with a great new idea, and then you have to deal with waste and this whole sustainable fashion. And so it's fashion is probably one of the most difficult industries out there, because
I
every
think
season you
so
have to come up with
too.
something fresh. So
I think so too. One of my biggest mentors in Dallas had told me, you're going to learn right away in the beginning of the industry that it's extremely wasteful, and
mhm,
that your integrity and being ethical is out the door, even kind of before you start.
right.
Mainly for the fact when we start making our patterns and cutting, you're already at a 30% waste.
Hmm.
So making those scraps work, and that costs money. I deal with a lot of neoprene, so my yardage starts at $18 a yard and can go up to $58 a yard depending on what I'm working on, and that's a 30% cost waste on that is a lot of money.
Yeah, it is a lot. It is a lot of money. We talk about sustainability and waste. It's interesting. So when I go to Magic, it's interesting because I mean, it's a huge event, but there's spaces where we all kind of eat. It's not a cafeteria, but there's like almost like a food court at a mall, something like that. An opportunity to talk like I was talking to a sales rep or designer from another country, and he does men's fashion, and he was saying like the challenge with men's fashion is sometimes the margins are greater, but men in general, tend to buy less clothing, and then women, again, just generally speaking, buy more clothing, and so maybe the margins are shorter there. But then I talked to a boutique owner out of Canada, and she had several boutiques that she runs, and she was talking about like because we were talking about like there's a lot of data you could collect on consumers inside your store, so you know what to buy and what's trending, stuff like that. And one year she made a bad bet, if you will. She bought something she thought she knew what her customers liked, and she bought a bunch of this stuff. And you only have so much square footage, and every square foot needs to make money. And the stuff didn't sell through, so now she's discounting and stuff like that. So it's very interesting to even where we go back to talk about like you know because again, you have like an absentee owner and the clerks kind of know, and again, you're really data driven. So you're looking at what's selling really well to where if you get it wrong, I mean, if you're a small business owner, it could really put you out of business because again, going back to like only good as the last season, not only for the designer, but for the owner of the boutique, because if they get it wrong and styles change, it's like, man, that could really cripple a
It
business.
can take you under completely. Absolutely. Even in the pattern making world, we live on 1/16th of an inch. Let's say we do that 1/16th of an inch wrong and it goes across the body and it's times seven. You mean to tell me that's a total waste of production if it goes through? If your pattern maker, 1/16th of an inch is nothing, ideally. But when you put it around a body and you lay it flat on fabric, it can literally, before it even hits the store, take your company under as an error. There's so many little big errors in this world, from making to sewing to selling, and so many other people that you have to trust in that process that can just completely take you under right
Yep.
away.
Yep. No, it's definitely. I had a friend. I used to live in Vegas, and he had a business in, I think it was Henderson. And what would happen is, let's use Walmart as an example, but let's say they buy something from overseas. It comes into California, gets shipped in California. Then the trains, the shipping containers would go to Henderson, and I mean, there's a big order, so they'd go through it, and his employees would check the zippers and check this and quality control before I ever got to, let's say, Walmart, but even let's say Dillard's or Macy's or any one of these companies. So it goes through quality control, and then the issue is if it's wrong, does the company spend the money? And this goes back to manufacturing overseas. Do you send them back overseas for them to fix it? Which, oh my God, the clock is ticking, or do you find it somewhere in the United States to fix the zippers or whatnot? Um, or is it just trash because again the margin is so small? So I think that again it's like, and I talk to people where yeah you're gonna pay a little bit more premium upfront, let's say to be manufactured in the United States. But if there's an issue, or you could work more closely with the manufacturers. But if it's overseas and that thing comes in wrong, I mean, I have my own little clothing line. It's called Fast Show Junkie for people that are into fashion
Love it.
shows, I should say. And the very small orders. And it's taking like 2 weeks to come in from China, and then I have a hat here somewhere. I have this hat here,
I love
and
it.
I mean, it's kinda cool looking, but the quality's shit. And so I just ordered like 3 of them. So then going back to my guy and coming up with a better, and again, there's a small and a hats I could get away with because it's not seasonal, but the hoodies and stuff like that, it's like, man, that clock is ticking. So,
It is.
yeah, and
And
then
when
we're
you're
so
not
sensitive about
hands on
margins,
with
so
your product, it's really difficult to see what's going on. The good thing about manufacturing in America is you should be able to walk into that unit at any given time just to see where your product's at. So if you ever catch an error, you can catch it right away. If you don't, in China, you've got this 3-month layover. It comes back, you notice it's wrong, you send it back, and then the season and it's out. It does. For small batch makers,
mhm,
that doesn't work for us. It's really difficult.
exactly, and then just lastly, we'll wrap it up here in a second, but, going back to, magic, it's interesting too because you walk through there and the designers have been around and they're successful. They're using magic as a place to say, let buyers know that, hey, I'm going to be a booth, blah, 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 at such and such space. And then they're booking buyers appointments with those, with the buyers. And then you have these other designers that, yeah, I mean, the stuff looks great to me, but they really don't have no following, and they spent a lot of money manufacturing, creating these lookbooks, and really people just kind of walk in. I mean, it's like 10 deep at some booths, and there's really nobody at these other booths. But and then I've talked to other boutique owners that they don't even really go to trade shows anymore because they kind of feel comfortable with the designer they're working with. And maybe they're not the best designer in the world, but there's a level of comfort, that they know they're going to deliver. They're going to get again, because if you order and you own a boutique and the shipment doesn't show up, that's a whole nother issue. So to break
Right.
in, again, trying to do the wholesale route, a lot of designers don't realize that, yeah, you spend a lot of money to go to a trade show or even a fashion week, but there's no guarantee that you're gonna get
There's
those orders.
not.
So I think, and I know other boutique owners too that they kind of go back to like they have a big social media following, the designers, and so they feel pretty confident that if they do buy that item, even if it's a new designer, that designer can drive traffic to that boutique. So it kind of helps them get that up, get the plane off the runway, if you will. So I
Right.
think that's something designers should think about too, is like, yeah, you might be great, but man, that boutique owner is taking a huge risk on a kind of an unknown designer,
For
and you
sure.
better do good story. And lastly, like going back to this energy drink thing too, is that yeah, let's say the drink is really good, but we're still and it's only 3 SKUs, but you're still fighting for shelf space. And
Right.
so, I go to convenience stores like, where are we gonna put your stuff? And even if we put the stuff there, you know, you have to have a lot of money to let people know that, hey, stop drinking this brand or that brand. This brand is better. So again, a lot of people don't realize like the marketing dollars to build your brand up. It's very heavy lifting, be it
It
fashion
is.
or drinks.
For sure. To tell a story is one thing, but I think we are in a new era of where people are buying products because they're fans. They're a
Mm,
fan of that company. They're a fan of that, how they make. They're a fan of the ingredients that go into it. And they're a fan of the person who's doing it. It's more of this
mm.
fan base versus this trend.
You're right on.
I'm
You're
going
right
to
on.
follow
You're right
this
on.
trend. People are becoming a little bit more connected on, and I think social media has a lot to do with it. People are hearing people's stories and they're seeing how it's being made, and to have a visual of becoming is people like to see those things. People want to know how it is to grow.
Well, it's really great information, and yeah, hopefully we will see you at Santa Fe Fashion. I'm sure we'll talk again between now and then. And
For
if you have
sure.
any friends in your circle that would love to be on our podcast, we'd love to have them on as a guest. So we'll link up places where people can find you on our social media. And like I said, they can watch us on YouTube or
All
iHeart
right.
and some of the other
Th-
podcast channels. So
Thank you so much. I look forward to Fashion Week, and I can't wait to connect again.
sounds great. Have a great afternoon. You take care now.
You too. Bye.